Hello everybody, welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We got a good one for you as always. Some really pretty surprising news. It's pretty shocking news right off the top out of Russia. Apparently, it looks like Ukraine just tried to drone strike the Kremlin. It didn't work. The anti-aircraft missile shot it down, but it really has produced a pretty crazy situation. We'll delve into that as Russia is accusing Ukraine of launching drones at the Kremlin. And according to a video, I retweeted it at my Twitter account, SBW272. It sure looks like they did. The Federal Reserve rates have been raised once again. Jerome Powell continuing his collision course with a recession, but apparently he's going to try and stop it next time. We'll get into some of that as well as the latest for the Fed meeting today is out in the books in the New York Times. Also, a crazy story out of New York City where a white subway rider essentially strangled a mentally unwell homeless man in front of everyone, and the police just let him go, and the public largely acted like, there was nothing wrong. A really, really crazy story. And we'll take a look at how his treatment, especially by the police, juxtaposed to, normal crime, especially in the subway, how it's treated by both the police and the broader society. Also, TV writers are saying that they're striking this to stop the destruction of their profession. We'll take you through the newest TV strike and why, some of the Writers Guild of America has more power than you might expect. All right, but first today, Russia and Ukraine. Some of the latest developments. Two explosions occurred 15 minutes apart over the Kremlin early on Wednesday morning. Video footage verified by the New York Times showed an incident that set off a flurry of accusations and escalated tensions between Russia and Ukraine. And I feel like the New York Times here, I think what we can expect from them is, very much couch language, trying to push a narrative here. What you can expect here from Newsflash is just me, literally just me. I'm trying to just break down the situation and give you the best of what I can as someone who is knowledgeable about this stuff and trying to push through some of the noise on this. Like, it clearly seems that, we hear it set off a flurry of, there was an object that looked very much to be some sort of military or drone type device that was shot down over the Kremlin yesterday or this morning. Russia claimed the Ukrainian government had orchestrated a drone attack, describing it as a deliberate attempt to strike Vladimir Putin's residence, and that was foiled by Russian electronic warfare systems. Russia did not release any evidence to show that Ukraine was behind the explosions. But again, who else would they be? I find it, the United States have not been perfect on this war, but they have not been pushing. Is it Azerbaijan? Is it China? Is it, Nepal? Are they the people that out of nowhere, despite not being in any war with Ukraine, decided to shoot a weapon at Ukraine? Of course it's Ukraine. Come on here. This is the same BS, the same, just playing with people's perception of reality that we saw in the wake of Nord Stream, right? Because they were like, oh, it could have been anyone, it could have been the U.S., it could have been, the U.S. has not been perfect in this war, but by and large, they've been pushing for restraints. They've been the two main positions have been or three from the United States have been we're really going to give you unlimited support, but we would also kind of like to know what you're doing, even though you're not telling us that. Still not going to jeopardize the unlimited support, but we are also not going to we're going to limit it somewhat, and that we're not going to give you weapons to strike deep into Russian territory, especially air-based weapons. And Ukraine has gotten their hands on them, and they have used these drones to clearly try and strike very deep into Moscow. Ukraine, denied any involvement, obviously, asserting that Russia manufactured the incident to distract attention from the Ukraine looming counteroffensive. Okay, sure. I don't know. That would be a crazy thing to do, but there's certainly a possibility that happened. But okay. On Wednesday, U.S. intelligence agencies were still trying to determine what happened, according to two American officials briefed on the situations. U.S. officials have, in the past, voiced concern about Ukrainian attacks on Russian soil. And again, we've seen time and time again from both, authorized and unauthorized reporting that the U.S. government is very concerned about the fact that Ukraine is just getting our weapons and telling us to essentially fuck off. We don't want to hear anything about it. What you have to say, just telling us, we're the annoying parent telling them to go to bed early on a school night. And they're saying, hey, we want to bomb a nuclear armed state. and potentially start World War III. Like it's all right to do it. Screw off, Americans. Like just let us take your weapons and don't tell us anything more. That seems to be their attitude. It's just an attitude of complete entitlement. No sort of real respect towards the fact that if you, the Russian flags would be flying over Vladimir Zelensky's house right now if it wasn't for American investment, and not just Western investment, but American investment here. Like, that is just the reality of the situation. And the fact that America, American policy officials, they don't operate in the best interest of America as a whole. They don't operate in the best interest of attempting to, preserve America. And operate in what is the best, interest for the citizens of America, the citizens of the globe, and America promoting stability abroad. They want to operate within the best interests, operate in the best interests for themselves. They want to do what's best for them, and they very clearly know that it is within their best interest to, assert American power against Russia, to continue the defense structured economy, to continue to funnel more and more industry and money into these defense contractors and continue to rise the defense budget. Like, these are all real incentives for people making these decisions, not to promote world peace, not to promote, have Americans not, be pushing a war and risk possible nuclear war. Those are not the incentives. They operate on a completely different structure of incentives than what you would assume an official who's operating in the best interest of America would operate on. But, because I think when you consider all that, it certainly makes what they're doing here and why they're really clearly letting Ukraine get away with doing whatever it wants and just telling it to giving Ukraine weapons and really accepting Ukrainian efforts, because, if we wanted to, we could know a lot more. Also, we could, condition Ukrainian aid on the fact that, hey, they actually tell us what's going on and we actually have a hand in administering this war as well. Because, again, we are the ones stopping a Russian flag from flying over the Ukrainian presidential palace right now. But instead, we are, possibly even, this could have been done with United States weapon here. A United States drone that was provided, or a Western drone that was provided. Like, think about how that would look if a Western drone hits the Kremlin, kills the leader of a nuclear-armed state, as evil and as Hitler-like as he may be, killing children, all that stuff. That is going to lead us to one thing and one thing only, and that is war. We are going to continue to see this kind of crazy situation happen and develop here. And I think it's very, very hard to trust American officials as competent forces and as good faith forces towards de-escalation. Kyiv is apparently readying tens of thousands of soldiers for his counteroffensive and stepping up strikes aimed at weakening Russian forces. Putin is preparing to preside over a major military parade in the Red Square next Tuesday on Russia's main patriotic holiday, the May 9th celebration of the Soviet Union's World War II victory over Nazi Germany. Whatever the prominence of these explosions, it was clear that the Kremlin had made a deliberate choice to publicize the incident. No bleep. If there was drones hovering over our White House trying to kill Joe Biden, we would make a pretty big deal out of it too. Putin's press service issued a rare 5-paragraph statement alleging the Kyiv regime had used drones to carry out an unsuccessful attempt on the president's life. The Putin spokesman said the president was not in the Kremlin around the time explosions occurred, around 2:30 a.m. Moscow time. The explosions were indeed a drone attack. The penetration of the central air defenses of central Moscow's air defenses would represent the latest embarrassing failure by a Russian military that has struggled throughout the 14-month war. And to be fair to the Ukrainians here, they did get pretty close to Moscow here. But again, I think the ultimate failure is the fact that the drone blew up before hitting its target. And again, Ukraine, for its part, has largely maintained a policy of deliberate ambiguity over what happened, over whether it played a role in attacks inside Russia. In this case, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky directly denied responsibility. He told the Nordic broadcaster TV2, "We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We're defending our villages and cities. We don't have enough weapons for these. Dealing with Putin," he said, "will be left to an international tribunal." So again, either this did not happen for no reason. This did not happen for this explosion, or whatever they're calling it, did not appear out of thin air. It had to come from somewhere, and the clear most likely candidate is Ukraine. And what this should really represent is a clear wake-up call to the people who are sending this, or the people at the top of our military, the people at the top of our kind of the Biden administration, who are just letting this happen with just completely unfettered support for Ukraine, not really in any way trying to ascertain what's going on here, get a sense of what our weapons are being used for. So hopefully that starts to get clamped down on a little bit more as a result of this. Going to be interesting to see how much this is kind of covered up with the media responses in terms of assigning blame and responsibility, and what we'll continue to find out on this on the days ahead. With that being said, let's go to our next story. Federal Reserve raising interest rates yet again as they continue their push for a recession and to boost unemployment, as they so love to do, to tighten up that labor market. Loosen up that labor market. Federal Reserve officials raised interest rates by a quarter point on Wednesday in the 10th straight move against their fight against rapid inflation. Again, completely fighting literally one cause of inflation, and the only type of inflation that actually puts money in workers' pockets. The fact that they're targeting wage growth, they're targeting stability of employment. They're not targeting corporate profiteering, corporate price gouging at all. And that is, a completely inadequate, as we've discussed many, many times on the show, method to fight inflation. And we've seen now very, very little correlation on the overall inflation rates. We saw some of the, Ukrainian war chaos, stuff like that, supply chain stuff go down over the second half of 2022. But now we are closing out the first half of 2023, and inflation has relatively stagnated because even though interest rates are being consistently raised, squeezing not just workers, but banks more and more, as we talked about on the last show, and also with Silicon Valley. It does seem really like they are continuing, at least for now, to push on this path. Central bankers lifted the rates to 5. They changed it from 5 to 5.25%, a level they had not reached since December of 2007. The move capped the fastest series of interest rate increases since the 1980s, as the central bank chair Jerome Powell attempts to slow down the economy and weigh down price increases. So this stuff is having a negative impact on large parts of the economy. And again, as I saw Chris Hayes on Twitter of MSNBC talking about Jerome Powell literally refusing to take yes for an answer. And refusing to, again, also, I would add, to comprehensively and honestly look at the causes of inflation, which is very, very damaging. And I think really does show, his true outlook here. And, maybe some of the chaos in the banks that's been happening lately could be attributed to a kind of a motivation for him slowing down, which he has said he's going to do. This, I think, will be the last major time that he pushes interest rates up in this way. But still, we'll see how much damage, over the coming weeks and months, how much damage he really has done maybe here with this policy. In determining the extent to which additional policy firming may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags on with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic financial developments. The policy-setting Federal Open Market Committee said in its release. The may in the statement is a signal that the officials are not confident further moves will be absolutely necessary. Decision on a pause was not made today, Powell said. This decision will approach in the June meeting. So not really saying that they're going to pause, but saying they may pause. Like it is kind of funny here that they're really kind of pushing up this and refusing really to give the market, which is interesting as well, refusing to give the market, especially after some of the ruling has been doing lately, especially in the banking sector, again with First Republic and Silicon Valley and all that, refusing to give the market any sort of clear sign on what the future is with these interest rates. And because it's not really looking too secure. It's not really looking too prominent here at all about what is going to come down the road. Are we going to push past? Are we going to push inflation past? How far is it going to have to go? We're going to have to push inflation past or not inflation, but interest rates past 2008 levels. Are we going to to control, are going to push them past, like, is 6% going to be enough? Is 7% going to be enough? Especially if inflation keeps, stagnating relatively as is now. How is that going to be in any way a sustainable thing? All right, yeah, I'm on the verge here. I'm pulling up the U.S. inflation rates over the course of multiple months. So we got, it hit the peak again, June 9.1, July 8.5, and this is all throughout Jerome Powell spamming that interest rate raise button. 8.3, 8.2, 7.7, 6.5, and then it kind of has. It's going to be available in a few days, the one for April, but March hit its lowest by far 5. So it is going down. And it is relatively well controlled, but it seems to have kind of flattened out a little bit. But again, obviously Jerome Powell has just been lowering this whole time. So like, what happens when we see some stagnation? In a week's time, the inflation for April is going to come out, and if it's 4.9, for example, off of March's 5%, like, is that going to be? Is Jerome Powell going to say that and just be like, all right, another 0.25%, we're going to raise it? Like, I think that would really be a pretty remarkable mistake, because he just has to realize he does not have the power to go after the sources of inflation that are actually, clearly actually causing, inflation right now. We're seeing it kind of seep in. It's been kind of alternative media, I guess you could say, saying this for quite a while. The fact that, okay, the problem is not entirely, just like the 80s, the wage price spiral. There's also factors from Ukraine, and there's also factors from corporate profiteering. And we've seen, I really think the 4% drop from last June is a lot of the Ukraine stuff going away, but we still have not addressed the corporate profiteering stuff at all whatsoever. And that is not going to change at all what the interest rates are. Interest rate raising won't change the general inflation tally. Investor bets on where the interest rates go from here are tilted toward a pause at the Fed's next meeting and then lower rates later in the year. Powell said that cutting interest rates this year was not in our forecast, but one calculation puts the likelihood that the Fed would hold off changing rates when it meets in June at more than 80%. So, some sort of stagnation, but also, of course, the inflation in a week's time, May 10th, is going to be interesting to watch for sure. The Fed does not have an agenda to further consolidate banks, Powell said in response to a question about the seizure and sale of First Republic to J.P. Morgan Chase, already the country's largest bank, which is, by the way, absolutely going to be, it already is, too big to fail, controls so much of the economy, and is essentially just a bank of, just a kind of behemoth hydra of all these failed banks. So the Powell said it was a good policy to limit the expansions of the biggest banks, but the exceptions that made sense but exceptions made sense in cases of bank failures. Well, if you keep raising those interest rates, we could see more and more bank failures here, Mr. P. He also said the credit conditions were tightening following banking turmoil, which could slow the economy. Powell said it was also essential. This is interesting. He said the central nation's debt limit was raised in a timely way, saying, quote, "It's very important that this be done," but saying he can't be giving advice to politicians. So it's definitely something he'd be after, and perhaps Biden would find a unsuspecting ally in that department in his fight over the debt limit oncoming with Kevin McCarthy. All right, with that being said, let's move on to our next story. This is a really just dark story here, just fair warning. Typically, when dozens of people witness someone, this is Akilah Lacey breaking it down in The Intercept. When people witness someone killing another person in a public space, two things happen: the killer is arrested, or they flee. The tabloids might dub them the subway killer, for example. It's New York Post. You can see the headline already. None of that happened on Monday when the 24-year-old white former U.S. Marine, his name hasn't even been made public yet. That is just incredible. We don't need the name. It's no big deal. Put in a Eric Gardner-like chokehold 30-year-old Jordan Neely, who is black, on F train in the NoHo area of Manhattan. The 24-year-old man did not flee. He was not arrested, and the tabloids along with more respected news outlets, issued glowing appraisals of him. This is a guy who, in broad daylight, in the middle of the subway train, just strangled a guy who is posing no threat to anyone, clearly homeless, clearly having a bad time. Like, these rise of psychos. Probably just the stories about, we've seen kind of shooting through the Ralph Yarl situation. There's been multiple others with people of all races, of just people going about their day and being shot at or attacked, and just this real, just unhinged nature of just people willing to be murderers in an instant second just because they're convinced, there's someone that they didn't like. This guy got scammed $40 out of parking in Texas. Like, he's like, oh, that sucks. Like, you could be, I get being really pissed about it. Call the police, whatever. This guy, goes back, takes a revolver, murders the guy, goes back, eats his dinner, with his car parked in that parking lot, and the guy just bleeding out on the floor like nothing ever happened. Like, this kind of impulse, of course, combined with the lack of respect that, especially for homeless people of color, that pervades our society, is just really making the world a very, very scary place, especially if you're in any way kind of marginalized or dealt a bad blow in life, whether minority race, you're homeless or whatever. The unusual treatment may have had something to do with the victim. Neely was unhoused and had a history of mental illness. He was not good to be, making subway riders uncomfortable and reportedly shouting some threats to the riders. He was apparently asking for food, though, shortly before being strangled to death. Like, especially if you're, this guy was under no threat. Like, he's a perfectly fit 25-year-old former Marine. Like, but if you're, a young woman on the train, you're trying to go to work, there's a scary guy, that is not a good thing. But that is not an indictment. That's not an indictment of him. That's an indictment, I think, of our broader society. And it's also not an indication or an invitation, and it does not make it okay for someone to come and straight up murder you, strangle you, choke the life out of you in front of everyone. Like, that is an absolutely horrific situation. Police took the subway rider into custody briefly for questioning, then released him shortly afterwards. For advocates working on issues of poverty and police abuses, there's a simple reason why Neely's killing happened the way it did and why. The aftermath, nothing seemed out of the ordinary when the killer was set free. Fear-mongering rhetoric and about homelessness and crime from Democratic New York leaders Kathy Hochul and Mayor Eric Adams, which has been absolutely out of control. Like, in New York, there have been really two people who have been portraying the city as a bastion of just unlawfulness, like making it look just Gotham City-esque, like, craziness that makes it just completely unsafe to live. And they haven't been Republicans. They've been the mayor and the governor. Like, they have been slandering the city. They have been hyping people up. They've been making people, mostly people outside the city, more fearful of the city, and causing the people who are more well to view people who are in worse positions, just in the worst way possible. It's just been really, really remarkable to see how that has spread. We saw it in the last election, the midterms. Like, people, every area around the city was so scared about this crime and the problems with the city and the fact that everything just seemed to be going so out of control. They needed strong hands to fix it. Well, they went with the Republicans because the Republicans are that party. And Mayor Adams, Governor Hochul completely bear the responsibility for demonizing their own populations and, on a more stupid, more political level, just the people that would vote for them in the first place. Of course, you're going to have individuals deputizing themselves, thinking that this is the response, said Adolfo Abreu, housing campaign director for Voices of Community Activists and Leaders of New York, or Vocal NY, the grassroots member-led organization advocating for justice in housing, policing, and public health for poor and low-income people, because our leaders are saying, hey, there's so much rampant violence and homeless folks are a nuisance, and having armed police be the first interaction is the appropriate response. The New York Police Department's response to Neely's killing sends a dangerous message that anyone could take vigilante justice into their own hands without consequences. A spokesperson for the NYPD said the investigation is still ongoing and that even when homicide is witnessed, arrests aren't always made on the spot. That's not always how it works, said Sergeant Sanchez to The Intercept. The police declined to confirm the sergeant's first name. There are many parts to the investigation. It's not just eyewitness. Contrary to the NYPD statement, officers are often quick to actually make an arrest. When they see a murder happen right in front of them, even they are not that stupid. When a man allegedly stabbed a security guard in Queens last month, cops shot him on the spot. On the same day, when police responded to a man with a gun at a subway station in the Bronx, they shot him too. Again, this is a guy who had a weapon, hadn't shot anyone, but hadn't straight up murdered anyone right in front of them, but he was still shot. In another incident on the same day, when responding to a report of a burglary, cops shot and killed a 78-year-old man who answered the door while holding a gun. Probably just thought he was a burglar, mowed him down. In 2018, NYPD officers shot and killed Saheed Vassell because they said he was holding a metal pipe like it was a gun. And the cops said between 5 and 10 seconds passed between the time they arrived on the scene and they shot Vassell. And of course, in 2014, NYPD officer Daniel Pantaleo strangled Eric Gardner to death for selling cigarettes on the street. In 2013, NYPD officers shot a 16-year-old kid who said was acting suspiciously and had a gun. In 2008, another incident that lasted only seconds, NYPD officers fired 50 bullets that killed Sean Bell on the day of his wedding after his car hit an unmarked police vehicle. So, long history of just rapid use of violence. And of course, because this guy's homeless, this guy's black, this guy was causing a scene on the subway, he is allowed to be strangled with impunity and have the life choked out of him for all to see. Just absolutely crazy world where not only is this violence just normalized, but it's completely accepted by authorities at law. All right, let's go to our final story here today from the wonderful Alex Press and Jacobin talking about the writer's strike. When Sharon Rosenstein was hired onto her first television writing job, she had 2 young children. She needed stability, and USA Network show Suits offered her that. I got to work for most of the year. I knew what my income was going to be, and I knew what my job was going to be, she told me. But in the 8 years since that first job, the industry has changed drastically. I got to work for most of the year. I knew what my income was going to be, but the amount of time that we have to write a show has shrunk. The amount of writers who they will need to hire to write a show has shrunk. So writers end up working only 6, 10, or maybe 12 weeks in a year. You can't do a sustainable living, piece together a sustainable living doing that. Rosenstein explained the changes she made as we stood at the corner of 5th Ave and 37th Street in Manhattan, a few feet from the WGA, Writers Guild of America East's picket line. The location of a New York picket line is illustrative of the issue. They were picketing Peacock New Front, a name that is compelling evidence of the lackluster results you get when executives try to put words together. As I overheard one picketer say to another, "What even is this place?" Hundreds of writers clogged a full city block, chanting and holding up signs. Given the line of their work, those signs had a variety of pretty humorous messages, from fair contract now to pay your writers or we'll spoil succession. The changes Rothstein was speaking of, are what led to the strike, which began nationwide yesterday. The majority of picket lines are in the Los Angeles area, unsurprisingly. The WGA, both West and East, called the strike before midnight on May 1st, with the leaders unanimously voting for work stoppage after 6 weeks of negotiation with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers over a 3-year contract that covers some 11,500 film and television writers. Very, very big deal there. Announcing its decision, the union said the bargaining table responses of AMPTP, which consists of the big producers, all of them, Apple, Amazon, Disney, NBCU, Netflix, and Paramount, and as well Sony, has been really wholly insufficient given the existential crisis writers are facing. So the document has come out by the WGA, shows the distance between two sides on several of the writers' key issues. The studio is rejecting the union's proposal and really failing to offer a counteroffer. We'll close out the show, though, by letting one of the best explainers and someone who is, I believe, a TV writer himself, Adam Conover of Adam Ruins Everything, explain some of the problem.
That say, look, times are changing. We are not making as much money as we once did. This is not the golden era of television, although some of us would argue the shows are great. What do you say to them?
So I'd point out the fact that David Zaslav, the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, which is, the parent company of the network I'm talking to you on right now, was paid $250 million last year, $250 million. That's about the same level as what 10,000 writers are asking him to pay all of us collectively, all right? So I would say if you're being paid $250 million, Ted Sarandos made about $50 million last year. These companies are making enormous amounts of money. Their profits are going up. It's ridiculous for them to plead poverty when the writers who are making their shows, some of them are not able to pay their rent or their mortgages. I literally know writers who have had to go on assistance because they have not been able to make their year. If you look at these companies, they're making more money than ever. It's the people who make the shows for them that are making less.
Adam Conover, thank you so much for...
Yeah, so really great way of putting it, when they're making more money than ever, but the people who are doing the job, the people who are really putting it together, they are making less than ever. And that, if that's not a justification for a strike, then I don't know what is. All the time we got for today. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been Newsflash. We're back on Friday.